Hello and welcome back. In this episode we will continue where we left off in our previous episode when we were learning how to work with SQL CE and WP7 Mango. In this episode we'll learn how to work with associations. We'll first learn what association is, which is basically a relationship between two tables. We'll learn how to associate a parent to a child, and then turn around and learn how to associate the child to its parent. So let's go ahead and get started. In our previous episode, when we took a look at how we can set up a basic SQL CE installation, we only took a look at how we can use one database table to save and query data from. Now, in a real-world scenario, we all know that's not going to be the way it works. So let's go ahead and learn how we can use associations to create a parent-child relationship between different tables. The first thing we need to do is we need to go back in. Well, let's go ahead and create our child table. We're going to call this episode tag, make it public. We're going to make this a table as well. And of course I need an ID, so let's go ahead and create a property of ID. We're going to mark this as a column. We'll come back and fill out the remaining attributes for that in a second. Let's go ahead and create another property, call it string, call it tag name. And this will also be a column. Now, I'm going to go ahead and copy in some code from above, because for the most part my column setup is going to be the exact same. The next thing I want to do is actually go ahead and set up my association. So let's go back to our episode. Let's set it up so we can have many episode tags pointing from our episode. First thing I want to do is go ahead and create another property. This is going to be of type entity set of episode. Call it not episodes, episode tags. Let's go ahead and give this a backing field. We need the backing field because that's how we're going to load our data. Now we're going to introduce a new attribute. This attribute is going to be the association attribute. The association attribute is what allows us to define our parent-child relationships. First thing we need to do when we set this up is tell it where to store the data. So we're going to use a storage property, and we're going to use the backing field. The next thing we need to do is provide the foreign key. This foreign key we haven't created yet, but we will, so just sit tight. And then we're going to need to provide our current key, so it's going to be ID. And that is it. We've now set it up so that we can actually point to our child tables, and we can tell it to push the data into this backing field, what the foreign key is going to be, and what our current primary key is going to be. So let's go ahead and go down to our episode tags table so we can set up that relationship to walk backwards to our parent. First thing I want to do, of course, is create a property that is of type episode that points back to our parent, and this is also going to be an association. Now we're going to want to go ahead and make this a backing field as well. And so let's go ahead and set up our storage to point to that backing field. Now we need to provide our key, which is going to be underscore episode ID, which we haven't created yet, but we will. Our other key, which is ID, and we're going to tell it this is the foreign key. Now, before we continue, I need to change this from a type of episode to a type of entity set, entity reference. It's going to be of type episode. Now, of course, when I do that, I get some squigglies down here because I don't want to return that. The entity ref, I want to return just the entity. So I need to add the .entity property to this. Now, I've been saying twice now that I need to create this episode ID property, so let's go and do this. In fact, it's not going to actually give me a property, it's going to be an internal field. We're going to make it nullable, and we're going to call it episode ID. And this is actually going to be of type column, because when we set up our relationship, we of course have to have a foreign key to our parent in our children. And this is what's going to store that. We don't actually want to expose this to the world because we want them to navigate through our objects to get the IDs of our parents and our children. So now that we've created our episode tag, we've basically defined our database table, we need to do one more thing before we go too much further, which is create a new field on our data context that's episode tags. This is required because for everything that we're going to expose to the world, we need to have a property here that allows the world to see it. Now what we need to do is go back and set up our database so that we can actually query the database, or initialize it with some data so we can query it later. So let's go ahead and create an instance of our episode tag. Let's go ahead and add this to our data context. And let's go ahead and submit our changes so that we can just get those done and over with. Now I want to come down into my episode and actually add reference to both of those tags. We're now going, that basically set up so that when I create an episode, it will have both tags associated with it so I can query it. But to prove that I've done this, let's go ahead and add some query logic inside of our view model just so we can see if we actually are getting this done. So in here, let's go ahead and just do episodes.first. And we're going to say found episodes, get our tags, and let's just go ahead and grab a count of those. And that's it. So we've done enough now to set up a second table that has a relationship between the episode and episode tag. So let's go ahead and run our application now and see if it actually worked. So here we go. Let's hit F5. Before we do that, let's go ahead and try to quicken a breakpoint in here. We did. So the fact that I've gotten here tells me that my associations were set up correctly, because if I didn't get here, I would have gotten an exception. And that would have told me my database wasn't initialized correctly. So let's go ahead and step through this. I was able to create my tags, and submit changes worked. So I was able to create not only my tags, but my episodes. And here I am at my episodes. Let's go ahead and step over this. Looks like I found an episode, and I found 2 of them. So if I hover over these, you'll see that I have 2 episode tags with some ID 1 and some ID 2. That means that I've set up my relationships so that I can go from my episode table to my episodes tags, and now I have a parent-child relationship. And I could, of course, query this by doing data context.episodes where tag type equals blah, or tag name equals blah. So let's go ahead and recap what we did. Let's kill this. First thing I had to do is create my collection of tags in my parent, which points to my children. Give it the association tag. And basically, this is how you map parent to child. Once I had that set up, I went down to my child. I created my internal column that represents my foreign key, an entity ref field so that I can hold an actual instance of the object of the episode, and then my pointer back to my parent from my child. Now, one thing to keep in mind, if you misname or mistype any of these strings, you'll get a runtime exception when trying to create the database. That is the downside of using magic strings, but is what it is. I also had to go back to my data context and add a pointer to the episode tag table in order to actually query it. If I didn't do this, it would blow up. So that's it. Hope you learned something. Until next time.